These miniatures were primed with Vallejo's black primer using an airbrush before zenithal sprays of various colors were applied to help set the foundations for the flesh tones. I'll only be showing the painting process of some of the elements on these miniatures, but the steps are the same between them all, albeit using different colors. There will be a spreadsheet excerpt shown at the end of this video showing all of the colors that were used and for what areas they were used on. The two models I'll be working on in this video is the unit leader and the nurse. The unit leader was given a zenithal spray of Vallejo's UK bronze green followed by a zenithal spray of desert tan. The nurse was handled much the same, all being Vallejo primers, German red brown and desert tan respectively. Once at my desk I began work on the flesh first. I didn't really plan any of this out, including the priming, so I started simple with glazing magenta to add warmth and shadow to the skin. I do this over 2 to 3 applications, allowing the glazes to fully dry before applying the next. There was actually no wait time for these applications to dry at all, as I did all of this in an assembly line fashion, applying one layer to one miniature, setting it down and moving on to the next miniature. Once I returned to the first in line, the paint had enough time to dry. Painting like this can be mind-numbing, but it's efficient if nothing else. Once the magenta glaze has fully dried, I begin glazing peach to add a stronger foundation, as the airbrush work had left her looking pretty pallid. I should have hit her with more of the highlight colors. Like the magenta before, I do this over several glaze applications, allowing plenty of time to dry in between as to not tear up the previous layer. This is important for a smoother finish. From here, I then repeat the 2 previous steps, glazing in more magenta and peach to punch up the vibrancy. Finally, I get to add the first highlight. This was done by combining the peach with equal parts of an ivory white and glazing it over about 80 to 90% of the skin on the first application. I repeat this step several times, but covering a little less area each time. Always putting more paint where the light would shine the brightest on. Since there are 5 of these miniatures, I keep my steps simple and add only one brighter highlight. However, like before, this is done over several thin layers and multiple times, and again, covering slightly less area with each pass. Doing this will give a little bit of subtle variation in tones between the 4 colors applied by the brush. And all that airbrush work, it was completely covered. Turns out if you were to try to reproduce anything I did here, you wouldn't need an airbrush at all, as everything else is fully base coated by the brush. With how I painted the flesh on these miniatures out of the way, let's move on to the best yet simultaneously ugliest camo that I've ever painted, starting with the base coat of yellow oxide. I threw caution to the wind, and to contrast the warm magenta of the flesh, I mixed green and ivory white to make a cold mint green and apply large splotches that are spaced fairly evenly. I repeat the same step but with a nutty brown. I'm only trying to keep a decent spacing of the colors, but I'm not worried at all about the shapes. letting them appear organically random. Next are much smaller black splotches that are again evenly spaced around the clothing. I didn't want perfect dots, but more importantly, I want these small. But not as small as I can manage, as I'll be placing even smaller ivory dots on all of these black splotches in the next step. Speaking of which, behold, said smaller ivory dots. I tried to remain cognizant to place some dead center and others off center, but remembering to place them at different positions, some at the top, some to the right or the bottom or left. I could have and probably should have added some glazes to gradually darken parts of the clothing to add shadows, but I chose not to do it in this instance. Despite having very few steps, painting all of the tiny splotches and even smaller dots can be taxing. The white clothing was done in a more traditional manner, with a full base coat of a dark gray, and then slowly building up multiple layers of lighter grays up to an ivory, with each color being applied thinly and over several coats apiece. Much like the glazes done in previous steps, each new application would cover slightly less surface area. I decided not to show the rest of the steps used, as they're all basically done in the same manner as I painted the white clothing, just basic layering and nothing else fancy. The makeup was subtle glazing around the eyes and under the cheeks, and then some various colors for the lips, all of which were from the paints already on my palette. The eyes were just black with ivory for the sclera, but assuring I left some black around the sclera, and finally the same black for the pupils. With all the other elements base coated and layered with several highlights, I black out the base rims and then I call it a night. This is what I ended with. I like how the nurse came out the most from these 5 miniatures, but somehow I keep seeing a hybrid of Marilyn Monroe and Heath Ledger's Joker. The girl with the wrench I also like a lot, particularly the highlight placement on the flesh and hair. However, her, along with others in this unit, I tried experimenting with green as a base tone, which ultimately made them look like they were spawned by the Jolly Green Giant. For the unit leader, I like how the blue highlights for her hair came out, as opposed to using shades of gray, and since I was going for an Asian skin tone, the overly yellow flesh didn't trouble me. For the girl with the radio, I used brown to highlight her hair, and here I probably should have used grays, as the tone is too similar to her flesh and the leathers. The highlight placements aren't necessarily bad, but they were executed poorly and need to be redone. For the girl with the RPG, she has the same problem as the girl with the wrench, being that there's too much green in her skin, giving her an incredible Hulk or Goblin-esque feel. And like the girl with the radio, the highlights on her face need to be redone completely. For lessons learned, I need to remember to step away after I think I'm finished, and then come back and re-review everything with fresh eyes before calling a project done. I still need to work on glazing, especially certain colors, as there are a handful that I have trouble with spreading smoothly compared to others. And no more greens to be mixed into general human skin tones, unless it's some kind of lighting effect. And that will bring this video to its end. I hope you learned something or inspired to start or expand your own collection of the defunct Dust 1947 game. If you have any questions, feel free to ask, and if you like the content of this video and would like to see more, you can easily support the channel by liking, commenting, sharing, and subscribing. I'm Jim with Working with Miniatures. I'm truly grateful for your time, and I bid you a fond farewell. Until the next video.